My name is Charles Cadwell. I'm a member of HCCDC, and my job tonight is to introduce you to the tour and to introduce you to the several tour guides that we have with us. This evening, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of HCCDC. And for some of us, 1990 may still seem like recent history. HCCDC has engaged a large number of neighbors in learning, researching, and sharing information about our part of Northwest DC. We're not going to detail all of that this evening, but I do point your attention to a June entry in our news archive on our website, where our current president, Carl Lankowski, documented the organization's 30 years and the shifting cast of leaders who've built and carried this organization ahead. Those of us who are currently acting as stewards of the organization appreciate all that prior effort. This evening, we're also showing our flexibility in the COVID era. We're taking our annual walking tour off the street and onto Zoom. This lets us roam further in time and further in geography, and it lets each of you be in the front row, and it means that we're going to go ahead come rain or shine. So here's what we're going to do. We have 16 short stories to share, and individual board members are going to share those, taking 2 or 3 minutes each. This way you get to meet many of the board, and unlike the walking tour, Keen Taylor doesn't have to do all the work. We've grouped these vignettes into 4 groups. One is history, one is streetscapes and architecture, a third is about the people, and the fourth we're calling looking ahead. We're going to be sharing 16 slides as we go ahead, and the tour will be at a good quick pace, but you should not worry. The slides will be on our website along with a video of the tour. And many of the vignettes are drawn from lengthier material that's already on our website. That said, much of what you're going to hear tonight is not there, so I invite your close attention. So let's get started. Keen Taylor, who's our longtime tour guide and local realtor, starts tonight's tour as well, talking about the first European settlers. So Keen, if you're ready, go ahead. And Carl, if you could advance to the next slide, that would be great.
Thanks, Chaz. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could join Historic Chevy Chase, DC, and some of the other neighborhood folks, and perhaps some far afield. I'm going to start with the early history of the neighborhood to get us going. The area which would eventually become the community of Chevy Chase was, as you might imagine, originally a thriving Native American community. It was blessed with abundant hunting, fishing, and simple farming, as well as a pottery production area from Clay and Soapstone Creek, located just to the south near today's Cleveland Park. This population was primarily made up of the Nacotchtank and Kanoi peoples of the Piscataway tribe. Eventually, these native inhabitants were displaced by colonial settlers, and the rural area evolved into a mix of plantation farms amid raw forest. In 1725, a gentleman named Colonel Belt was granted approximately 500 acres of this land by the 5th Earl of Baltimore. Belt's large tobacco farming operation was based out of the family's home, located on high ground about 500 yards southeast of today's Chevy Chase Circle. His large house was sited approximately where what is now 3734 Oliver Street Northwest. While none of that original structure exists, local lore says that the foundation of the current home there includes some of the masonry foundation from that Belt mansion. The plantation was also the genesis of Belt Road, portions of which still exist, running from what was then the commercial crossroads at Tenley Circle to the Belt home. This allowed for the transport of farm products to market in Georgetown and beyond. When the District of Columbia was founded by the new national government in 1790, DC was a 100 square mile diamond, although the actual city portion ended at Boundary Street, the current Florida Avenue just north of DuPont Circle. By the turn of the 19th century, with soil somewhat depleted by the constant growth of tobacco, the area's farmers switched over to cultivating mostly wheat. In the early 1800s, Colonel Belt's son sold a sizable portion of their land to Abraham Bradley, hence the origin of Bradley Road, who was then the Assistant Postmaster General for the United States. Over time, the remaining Belt holdings were further subdivided into smaller farming parcels, giving the area a quiet rural feel, which remained relatively untouched by the nearby capital city up to the Civil War period, which began in 1860. That war did accelerate development of more substantial roads in what would become Chevy Chase. Specifically, Military Road began as a way to link the ring of forts built to defend the Union capital from Confederate attack. Chevy Chase became the site of one of these fortifications, Fort DeRussy, which was built on land owned by a government clerk named Bernard Swart, who lived there with his wife and children, as well as 2 farmhands. That land is now part of the southeast corner of Chevy Chase and a portion of Rock Creek Park, near the current intersection of Military Road and Oregon Avenue. That brings us to the next speaker.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Carl Lankowski. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the modern origins of Chevy Chase DC. And it was a project of Francis Newlands. Newlands was born in Natchez, Mississippi in 1846. His father died young, and his mother remarried, bringing Newlands to the nation's capital. After getting his law degree from George Washington University, he departed for San Francisco, where he married the heiress of Nevada's silver fortune. When his wife and father-in-law died, he controlled the family fortune and followed a double career as a land developer and politician. In the late 1880s, Newlands conceived of a suburb for the nation's capital, and through the Chevy Chase Land Company, started buying up parcels along what was to become Connecticut Avenue, around 1,700 acres in all for that purpose. Newlands was a common enough amalgam of progressivism and racism. On the one hand, he organized irrigation projects to make the desert fruitful and engaged the federal government in that task. And his design for Chevy Chase was animated by a division that emphasized a healthy environment in a park-like setting and enjoying the latest in infrastructure amenities. On the other hand, Newlands believed that society should be organized in a racial hierarchy. He advocated undoing the enfranchisement of African-American citizens and favored an immigration policy excluding non-white people as much as possible. Unlike other early suburbs, Chevy Chase did not arise as an opportunistic response to the rail lines already in place. Newlands arranged to have a streetcar line created from scratch from Boundary Street, today's Florida Avenue, across Rock Creek and up Connecticut Avenue that he, in effect, created. Chevy Chase on both sides of the DC Maryland line was created as a whites-only enclave. The first houses were built on the Maryland side, and every lot sale proposal was examined by Newlands and the Chevy Chase Land Company board, which imposed conditions beyond racial exclusions. The house had to cost at least $5,000 and had to be set back from Connecticut Avenue. The architectural plan had to meet Newlands' approval. That development opened in 1892. The jewel in the crown was Newlands' own house overlooking the northeast quadrant of Chevy Chase Circle. The first house built in Chevy Chase south of Chevy Chase Circle was in 1907. As houses went up in the following decade between the Circle and Livingston Street, provision was made for a commercial zone on the west side of Connecticut Avenue, restricted to those same blocks. The Elizabeth V. Brown Elementary School was built at the northeast corner of Connecticut Avenue and McKinley Street on land donated by the Chevy Chase Land Company and opened its doors in March 1898. It was built and operated as whites-only school for its entire existence. The Newlands was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Democrat from Nevada in 1892, after Chevy Chase had already opened. The Nevada State Legislature selected him to represent the state in the US Senate in 1902. He died in office in 1917.
Carl, thank you very much for that. Many of you will have noticed that our historic Chevy Chase DC website has been revamped recently. It includes several new features. It's more accessible, has a lot of new content. Most of that work has been done by Kate Atkinson, who also authors the HOUStories blog on the website. Kate's going to tell us about one of the most spectacular homes built in Chevy Chase, DC, and why it lasted only a few short years. Kate?
Yeah, even before the streetcar suburb of Chevy Chase was created, the fresh country air here attracted a lot of wealthy families or a few wealthy families to build country manors. And tonight I'm going to tell you about one of them called Highwood Estate. It's remembered mostly because it was where General Pershing lived when he returned from World War I. He was and is Chevy Chase's most famous resident. That's him in the upper left corner of the slide there. Although it's long gone now, Highwood would be sitting in the middle of the 3300 block of Stevenson Place today. This 22-room estate, pictured at the bottom right of the slide, was built in 1907 by General Henry Clark Corbin for his new wife, Edith Patton. She was heir to a silver mine fortune, and she was 27 years his junior. Edith was one of the famous 5 Patton sisters living in a palatial mansion on DuPont Circle. These sisters were known to fan out so that at least one of them was at every single social event in the city. So on this slide, there's Corbin at the bottom left, and Edith is pictured with 2 of her sisters. She's the beauty at the lower left-hand side photo. To design Highwood, Corbin commissioned his friend Daniel H. Burnham, a world-famous architect whose buildings weren't usually raised and forgotten. He did the Flatiron in New York City, Union Station in DC, and he designed the entire 1893 World Expo in Chicago. Unfortunately for Corbin, health issues led to his death only 2 years after the house was finished. He moved to Arlington Cemetery, and Edith returned to the social whirlwind of DuPont. And the estate was rented out to an assortment of dignitaries for the next 2 decades: diplomats, bankers, royals, and White House cabinet members. By the mid-1930s, the elegant country lifestyle of Highwood, with its riding stables and servants' wings, had lost pace with the times, though, and it was torn down in 1939. In its place went block after block of efficient houses with electric GE kitchens. In fact, Highwood was so thoroughly erased by the modern street grid that it's impossible today to tell where it once stood without using old maps and aerial photos. But one trace remains, hidden in plain sight. It's a massive cement gatepost that once stood at the entrance to Highwood's long driveway on Rock Creek Ford Road, now Rittenhouse Street. For whatever reason, it was never taken down. And when the new housing went in, it simply became an odd fixture in somebody's backyard. It remains there today, cracked and weather-beaten from 90 years of obscurity. It's easily spotted from the alley behind Rittenhouse Street, near the intersection of 34th Place. That's it in the upper right side of the slide. And if you look closely, you can see the name Highwood etched across the top. And there's a second hint to its whereabouts, its elevation. Highwood was reportedly built on the highest point of land, which turns out is the second highest spot in Washington, D.C. A National Geodetic Survey marker benchmarks that high point, and you can find that sunk into the curb in front of 3351 Stevenson Place. So happy hunting.
So you set us off on a scavenger hunt, and if the police report strangers lurking in the alleys around Rittenhouse Street, we'll know. Thank you, Kate, very much. Many of you will know our work over the past couple of years to recognize George Pointer and his descendants who lived on Broad Branch Road. The genealogist who did so much of the hard work documenting the families that lived there is our board member, Tanya Hardy, who's going to tell us about the family. Tanya?
Thanks, Chaz. Mary Ann Plummer Harris and her husband purchased 2.5 acres of land on Broad Branch Road in the late 1840s. Mary Ann Plummer was George Pointer's granddaughter. They lived on the property for more than 80 years, and during that time had 8 children. As the children grew into adulthood, the land was divided into lots so that any who desired could build their own home and raise a family there. This family was only one of a number of free African American families that lived on the property now known as Lafayette Elementary School and Park. They all worked together and supported each other, and just across from their property was the Belt Plantation, where the enslaved could see this community of persons who looked like them, but managed themselves and lived a life of freedom. Certainly the Harris family and others could see those persons toiling just across from their family home as well. The Civil War began, and as it raged, the government realized that they needed more manpower to defeat the Confederacy. African Americans in southern towns that were occupied by the Union Army began forming their own regiments to fight the Confederates. The signing of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln not only established freedom for the enslaved African Americans living in Confederate states, but it also cemented this freedom by verifying their ability to serve in the United States military. On May 22, 1863, the War Department issued General Order Number 143 to establish a procedure for receiving African Americans into the armed forces. This order created the Bureau of Colored Troops, which designated African American regiments as United States Colored Troops, or the USCT. Realizing their duty to fight for freedom for all, 2 of Mary's sons, John and Joseph, who lived there on the property on Broad Branch Road, decided that they too would join and went immediately to Mason's Island across the Potomac in Virginia, and were among the first to enlist with the U.S. Colored Troops. They both survived the war, though injured, and returned to their home on Broad Branch. In 1924, the government, with the help of the Citizens Association of Chevy Chase, D.C., began working together to build a plan for taking ownership of the property that the Harris and the other families had worked so hard to get and build for themselves. A letter dated May 17, 1928, from the Secretary of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association to Colonel Ulysses S. Grant III, a member of the American Civic and Planning Association, spoke of the speed at which the property for the Chevy Chase Rec Center and Park was obtained and how it was greatly appreciated. When the Harris Moten family received notice of what was to come, Mary Ann Harris Moten, the daughter of Mary Ann Plummer Harris, spoke of how sad they were to have to leave their home and wondered where they would go. Their home place for 80 plus years was being taken from them, and they could do nothing about it. The family left and scattered across Washington, D.C., losing the connected support they had thrived on for so many years. On August 15, 2015, and that's the picture that you see at the bottom of the slide, the descendants of George Pointer gathered on the family Broad Branch property, now known as Lafayette Park, in a reunion that was a long time coming and definitely needed. Many had not seen each other for years or had never even met because they were children of older Pointer descendants who had long passed away. As they heard about the family history, they walked the land and thought about how things could have been had they been allowed to stay together. Gathering for a group picture under one of the old trees that towered above gave the group a feeling of being home again, if only for a few hours.
Tanya, thanks so much for that. As many of us know, there was no home rule for the district until the 1970s, but there were citizens associations that undertook to represent residents and connect neighborhoods to the city's commissioners. Today, the Chevy Chase Citizens Association is part of a much more modern Chevy Chase, but it was not always so. Like other citizens associations across much of the district, the early CCA was part of the problem, and Carl Lankowski is going to share some of the details.
Yeah, thanks, Chaz. What you see on the screen here are 3 exhibits. One of them is a census form here, where the cursor is now. Another is the Chevy Chase Citizen, which was the publication for many years of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. And the third one over to the left here is one of the updated versions of the old constitution of that organization. So here's what I want to say about that. The founders of modern Chevy Chase succeeded in their aim of creating a racially exclusive suburb. The 1940 US Census provides a picture of the neighborhood's first full generation of inhabitants. The census shows that by 1940, the only African Americans living in Chevy Chase, DC were either live-in domestic servants or custodial staff in the new Connecticut Avenue apartment houses. The key institution reproducing exclusion based on race was the Citizens Association. Quoting from the 1955 version of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association, I quote, "The objects of the association are to promote the civic, educational, and social welfare, and to protect property interests," end quote. Article 4 addresses membership. Section A specifies eligibility, election to membership. The first requirement is that the candidate must be a white adult. It is important to note that prior to the reestablishment of partial home rule in 1974, the citizens associations were the sole bodies mediating the relationship between citizen and state in DC. Participation in the affairs of the municipality was restricted in this way as well as by race. The Citizens Association of Chevy Chase, DC took its place alongside associations in other DC neighborhoods in January 1909, less than 2 years after the first houses were built south of Chevy Chase Circle. By 1920, there were 365 members. In 1937, it had grown to 1,600 members, and by 1952, the number was 3,400. Members paid annual dues, so the association was well endowed financially. Surviving records show that the association mounted aggressive door-to-door membership drives. In 1911, a federation of citizens associations was established. When neighborhood associations with African American members applied for affiliation, they were turned down. That led a decade later to the creation of a parallel federation of civic associations that welcomed everyone. By virtue of its large membership base, the Chevy Chase Association played an outsized role in the Federation's affairs. Its representatives advocated racial segregation and resisted every effort mounted elsewhere in DC to move towards ending segregation. The Federation fought civil rights legislation and battled against DC home rule. Change came with the trauma of the assassination of Martin Luther King in April 1968 and the civil disturbances in reaction to that outrage. White flight accelerated with the prospect of home rule, and the Citizens Association finally amended its constitution in the 1970s. But by the 1980s, it had become a member of both federations. Since then, the Chevy Chase Citizens Association has had 3 African-American presidents: George Haley of Tuskegee Airman fame, Doris Ingram, and Ed Hayes.
Thank you, Carl, very much. I want to move to our second group of quick histories, and that's dealing with the streetscapes in the architecture. And to start us down there, I'm going to return to our more regular tour guide, Keen Taylor, to talk about the commercial corridor on Connecticut Avenue. Keen, you're on.
Thanks, Jazz. The commercial corridor of Connecticut Avenue bisects our Chevy Chase neighborhood and is a key spine to the area, both physically and historically. As mentioned, the whole concept of the Chevy Chase development was to create one of the country's first commuter suburbs. As such, Connecticut Avenue was not only the route to and from downtown, it was also the business heart of the community. This portion of the road itself was a creation of the Chevy Chase Land Company, as we've heard, since that organization literally paid for the construction of Connecticut Avenue and its attendant electric trolley line. It ran from Adams Morgan up to the neighborhood at an estimated construction cost of approximately $1 million in the 1890s, which in today's funds would be equivalent to almost $30 million. The trolley line allowed for homeowners to live in bucolic Chevy Chase while still being able to efficiently commute to work downtown. This new infrastructure also facilitated delivery of products and mail from the city multiple times per day. Residents could phone an order to a department store downtown and have it brought up on the trolley. Kind of a precursor to what we have to deal with now during these COVID times. Initially, the plan for Chevy Chase development precluded any commercial buildings on the more upscale Montgomery County side of the line. Accordingly, the first business structures were built in the early 1900s on the DC side at the corner of Connecticut and Northampton Street, site of the current post office and surrounding operations. This initial construction was soon followed by the Avalon Theater a bit to the south, about which you'll hear more shortly, and the historic Hatcher Building at the corner of Connecticut and Livingston Street, shown in the upper left of this slide and familiar to all neighborhood coffee lovers. Between them was the historic Chevy Chase Arcade, which is one of the first indoor malls in America. That's the interior there that the cursor's on, and the exterior is just to the left of that with the green umbrellas. It's quite a special space if you get a chance to go inside. Additionally, the aforementioned E.V. Brown School, the first school in the neighborhood, which was attended by children from both the DC and Maryland side, and sat on the site of the current community center at McKinley Street. Another interesting feature of commercial development by the Chevy Chase Land Company was the way that business areas along Connecticut Avenue, all the way from Woodley Park to Chevy Chase, were clearly defined and separated by areas of residential properties. In that way, unlike the continuous jumble of mixed use on Wisconsin Avenue, the corridor to Chevy Chase had a much more cohesive and pleasing structure. A bit off the beaten path, we find Broad Branch Market, originally known as the Bond Food Market, so named for the family which founded it in 1919. It's located at the southwest corner of Lafayette School grounds on the corner of Northampton and Broad Branch. The market has long provided a more convenient shopping option for residents deeper in the neighborhood, further from the shops on Connecticut Avenue. And it's still a key element of the community.
Thank you, Keen, very much. You know, any neighborhood history group has to balance considerations of how communities adapt to changing times and how to preserve at the same time the architectural heritage that makes the place distinctive. Dick Tier, who's been a part of HCCDC since its beginning and served for a period as our president and is now our treasurer, is going to tell us about the effort to save one particular building, and that's the Avalon Theater. Dick?
Thanks, Chaz. The Avalon Theater is one of Chevy Chase DC's most prominent buildings and best loved institutions. It wasn't always called the Avalon. It started life in 1923 as the Chevy Chase Theater, as you can see on the graphic, with a single auditorium, a pipe organ, 2 shops, and a commercial upper floor. In 1929, the theater was wired for sound to accommodate the talkies, and the name was changed to the Avalon. It was refurbished in 1937 with an Art Deco theme inspired by the new Uptown Theater in Cleveland Park, and it got air conditioning. There was expansion in 1970. A 200-seat theater was added upstairs, and in 1985, a major renovation, a larger screen, a new sound system, and a reduction in seating capacity downstairs from 800 or more to 660. The Chevy Chase Arcade, already mentioned, had become a historic landmark in 1988. And in 1995, historic Chevy Chase DC applied to have the facade of the Avalon designated as a landmark as well. The Historic Preservation Review Board granted that status in 1996. All seemed well until the Avalon abruptly closed in March 2001 as part of the bankruptcy of the Lowe's chain of movie theaters. Lowe's had been operating it for some time. On its way out, Lowe's removed the 1985 screen, the projection equipment, and all the seats, in effect salting the earth. At the same time, there was fear that a grand old DC building might be razed. Someone who inspected the building at that time said that the Avalon suffered from 80 years of deferred maintenance, unquote. Many in the community were outraged, and a campaign developed to save the theater under the name Friends of the Avalon. Many people were involved, including John Kyle, owner of the building, developer Douglas Jamal, to whom Kyle rented the building, filmmaker Aviva Kempner, who contributed $80 in seed money at a large early public meeting, $1 for each year of the theater's existence, and above all, Robert Zeke, who convened meetings, publicized the cause, and began raising money. Bob Zeke's history of the undertaking forms the basis of this account. Zeke, his wife Joanne, and others operated a solicitation table in front of the vacant theater every Saturday for several months and raised at least $1,000 each time. In all, the Friends of the Avalon raised more than $200,000 and changed their name to the more dynamic Avalon Theater Project. The project qualified for nonprofit status under DC and federal rules. It obtained grants from the city government under Mayor Tony Williams, from other sources, and considerable assistance in kind. Finally, on April 22, 2003, the Avalon reopened with films provided by the DC Film Festival. In all, the Avalon campaign was a remarkable coming together of people who contributed time, money, and expertise to the saving of a local institution.
And now threatened, like many area businesses, by the economic downturn that comes with the pandemic. Chevy Chase DC was indeed a development and organized initially by the Chevy Chase Land Company, but the housing stock represents an incredible diversity of styles and scale. On our webpage, on the homepage, we have a revolving slideshow that shows you many of them. But how did these come about? The man who's helped so many residents buy and sell those houses is going to tell us about that. It's Keen Taylor again.
Thanks, Chaz. For sure, one of the most engaging features of the Chevy Chase neighborhood is its variety of home styles. From its earliest days of house construction on the Maryland side of the line in the 1890s and continuing into the initial development of Chevy Chase DC between 1907 and 1912, the land company encouraged diversity of design. There were all the popular styles that people loved in Victorian America, including colonial and classic revival, as well as arts and crafts, Queen Anne, and shingle style, in addition to the classic stucco four-square design and smaller, quaint bungalows. Examples of some of these are on the slide, as Chaz mentioned. The characteristics common to most of these homes included porches, a mixing of a variety of materials, as well as quality workmanship. The porches were typically located both in front and in back. The front porch offered a shaded outdoor area, which served as a natural transition between the private space of the home and the public street, allowing owners to see and, if desired, interact with their fellow neighbors. The rear porches were often located on both the main floor as well as the upper level. The first floor back porch gave a private family gathering spot overlooking the yard, while the second story sleeping porch offered a summer respite from the hot, muggy Washington nights before the advent of air conditioning. It's interesting to know that before AC was commonly available, Washington, D.C. was considered a hardship post for diplomats because of the humidity in the summer. As mentioned, the mix of exterior building materials gave the community its varied and interesting appearance. The common combination of stone, wood, shingle, and plank, as well as brick, provided a handsome appearance without the overwhelming uniformity so common to modern developments. Finally, the materials and craftsmanship of buildings around the turn of the 20th century, when Chevy Chase was initially constructed, proved to provide solid, long-lasting homes, which are still enjoyed by many people today.
Thank you, Keen. Those of us who live in homes that have had or are approaching their 100th anniversary, well, I'm sure have different stories about the durability of the homes that they're now century-old age. For all the diversity in the neighborhood, Chevy Chase DC is also the location of a large number of so-called kit houses. And Kane is going to go ahead and explain that to us.
Sure thing. As mentioned, one of the engaging aspects of Chevy Chase DC architecture is the unusually large concentration of these kit homes in the neighborhood. This term arises from the turnkey concept for this type of housing. The landowner, or in some cases developer, would peruse a store catalog such as Sears and Roebuck and literally order their house by mail. The manufacturer would prepare and ship all of the required materials pre-cut, in most cases, to the property by rail. The landowner and or their contractor would then follow the enclosed instructions to construct the home per the plans. Popular from about 1915 until the early 30s, with the bulk of this type of home being built in the 20s, these houses were the precursor to modern modular home construction. They were affordable, efficient, and a practical solution to the construction need because of being relatively quick and easy to assemble. As researched by my fellow realtor, Katrina Banier, we found that nearly 100 kit houses have been documented in Chevy Chase, with over 60 different models identified in the neighborhood. The most popular designs, as you might guess, included the Chevy Chase by Lewis Manufacturing Company, as well as the Sears products Americus and Martha Washington homes. Once an order was selected in the catalog, it typically took only 6 to 8 weeks for the materials to be collected, cut, shipped by rail for subsequent construction. Lots in Chevy Chase were first sold for about 25 cents per square foot, and the cost of these kit homes ranged from just under $1,000 for the more modest models up to almost $10,000 depending on the size and features of the design. However, the owner still had to pay for actual construction, including laying a masonry foundation, so the total cost was appreciably more than the kit itself. I hope you'll have fun identifying some of these as you go through the neighborhood. You can use the pictures here on this slide as well as on our website to give you some guidance about that, as well as a little web research. Have fun hunting.
Thank you, Keen. I want to remind people that if you have questions or comments as we go along, please do enter those in the chat box. There are more than 1,500 homes in Chevy Chase, DC, but there's also an amazing array of people who have lived here. You've heard about the Harrison Plummer families who lived here before the Chevy Chase Land Company accumulated the land around them. But I also want to introduce you to some people who've lived here since then. Kate Atkins is going to tell us about some of them. These stories are part of a longer pieces in our house stories section of the website. And this moves us into section 3 of our presentation tonight, and that's about the people. Kate?
Yeah, well, Chevy Chase DC may have been created for a certain type of person. As the years passed by, it reflected the evolution of society. You know, people move into a neighborhood, they live a few years or a lifetime. Many of them raise families. Some achieve great things or small things, and then a new generation takes over. And this has occurred nonstop for more than a century. I like to think that the lives these residents crafted for themselves became part of the DNA of the houses. But because memories are short, much is forgotten within a decade or two. And to rediscover these social histories, you have to dig into archives such as building permits, census data, oral histories, old newspapers, that kind of stuff. But one thing is certain, that when you crack open any door in Chevy Chase, DC, fascinating stories spill out. For an example, take the alley behind the 3900 block of Livingston Street. There's a medieval-looking stone turret with a mysterious tall tower beside it. It's been decades since neighbors had direct knowledge of why someone went to the trouble to build them. By tracking down fourth-generation family members, we learned that these two structures were added to the 1921 house by Eugene Lorenz, a German immigrant. And on starry nights, he used the little round castle and tower to converse with Europe and beyond on his ham radio, back when wireless radios seemed like magic. The house is on the left side of the slide. Pictured on the far bottom right of the slide is a house on 32nd Street in Barnaby Woods. Its tinkling fountains, undulating brick walls, and mosaic walkways are all gentle curves and soft landings. They're designed by the owner as part of a therapy of sorts after his son fell from the sky in the 1988 Lockerbie, Scotland bombing. Two separate houses in the 3800 block of Legation Street are joined by an odd wing. You can see it in the middle of the slide here. Added in 1924 by a father who had the socially awkward problem of a divorced daughter. It still stands today, even though it's been 60 years since anyone crossed from one house to the other. Next time you drive along Broad Branch Road near the Carnegie campus, notice three mansions that sit back from the road. There used to be a fourth, and together they were part of a stately family compound built in the 1920s by one of DC's most prolific architects, D. Franklin Snyder. Among his many famous buildings is the 12-story Cairo apartments on Q Street that stirred so much controversy it led Congress to limit building heights in DC, a law that still is on the books today. There were family scandals too in the Snyder family, including a sensationalized attempt in 1914 by his son-in-law to kill him for his money. The dirty business that became the subject of a novel based on his daughter's diary. Snyder's own magnificent estate on 12 acres, pictured here on the upper right side, was raised in 1959 by the Presbyterian Home so it could build a retirement village. Today, that's Ingleside. So these are just a few stories about daily life in Chevy Chase, DC through the decades that give us a portal into the past, and the well here is endless. Chad?
Thank you, Kate. And as the neighborhood's also, though, been a history of some more notable leaders in our nation's history, and several of those have been important to the civil rights movement in the latter half of the 20th century. And Kate's going to tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, among the most remarkable people who've lived in Chevy Chase, DC is a handful representing what I call a civil rights thread through our community. And I'd like to tell you about four of them. I'll start with the Reverend James Reeb. That's him in the glasses to the left side on the slide. If you saw the movie Selma, you'll remember him as the young white minister who rushed to Alabama after Bloody Sunday in March 1965. And that was the widely televised beating of peaceful protesters by law enforcement. The next day, Reeb answered the call that MLK Jr. put out to ministers across the country to join him for another march. He was, until about 6 months before that day, a resident on Chevy Chase Parkway, where he and his wife were raising 4 young children, and he served as pastor of All Souls Unitarian. Reeb had been in Selma less than 24 hours when a group of angry white men attacked him and 2 other pastors with baseball bats. He died 2 days later, sparking a national outcry that put pressure on President Lyndon B. Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He was only 34. That historic plaque you see pictured there is commemorating his time in the house where he lived. Next, there's Walter Tabriner. He's pictured on the right of the slide. He was a DC commissioner under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. He was head of the DC School Board when Brown v. Board of Education was decided, and he integrated DC schools. He was a tireless advocate to end racial discrimination in housing and employment also. Tabriner was a native of DC. He graduated from Princeton when Jewish people were barred from sports and eating clubs, and then he went on to Harvard Law. In 1933, he married and bought a house on Rittenhouse and 33rd Street. At a local level, he was involved in ending the segregation of citizens associations that, as Carl told us earlier, were staunch defenders of racially segregated neighborhoods in the district. Tabriner died in 1979, but his daughter still lives here. And then I'd like to talk about Lieutenant Colonel George Haley, also mentioned earlier by Carl. He's pictured in the middle of the slide at the top. He was a member of the elite Tuskegee Airmen, an all-black fighter force that broke the color barrier in the U.S. military. His family's rich bloodlines include Pulitzer Prize writer Alex Haley and African-American leader Frederick Douglass. He was also a local legend as the first Black president of Chevy Chase Citizens Association. He lived in the 3300 block of Oliver Street before his death in 1996, and his son is still a resident here. Lastly, there's Julian Bond. He's pictured in the middle of the bottom on the slide. He was co-founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and was a one-time chairman of the NAACP. He lived in Chevy Chase for 25 years, a frequent stroller along the avenue, regular diner at the Parthenon, and a patron of the Avalon. After his death in 2015, a bench commemorating him as a civil rights leader was placed in front of the Chevy Chase Community Center on Connecticut Avenue.
Thank you, Kate, very, very much. Our website has more than 30 oral histories of other residents of Chevy Chase, DC that I point your attention to. The woman who's done the lion's share of the work interviewing, transcribing, and editing all those oral histories is Joan Janshigo. She's also our corporate secretary. One of the amazing oral histories on there is of a woman, a neighbor, who died in 2016 without having been awarded the Nobel Prize that she deserved. And Joan's going to explain.
Thanks, Chaz. When Andrew Carnegie founded, excuse me, the Carnegie Institute of Washington in 1902 on Broad Branch Road, he wanted it to be a home for exceptional scientists who have imagination to think outside of the box. One of those exceptional scientists was Chevy Chase resident astronomer Vera Rubin. While working at Carnegie, she advanced cosmology. She was awarded the National Medal of Science for confirming the theory that each galaxy is embedded in a halo of dark matter. Carnegie President Eric Isaacs said that Vera challenged conventional thinking and transformed our understanding of the universe. Vera was honored posthumously recently when the large synoptic survey telescope located at the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile was named for her. It will be the world's largest digital camera ever made for optical astronomy. The telescope will be used to conduct a 10-year survey of the skies that will address questions about evolution and objects of the universe. An interest in the stars occurred early for Vera when she was about 10 years old. She shared a small bedroom with her sister, and not wanting to disturb her, she sat in the dark, staring at the stars from the sole window in their bedroom, sometimes all night. That was when she decided that she wanted to learn about astronomy. This was not possible from children's books, and her mother wrote a note to the librarian to allow her to borrow adult books. Vera remembers hungrily reading the books as she walked home from the library. Her parents encouraged her interest, taking her to the Potomac River where she could view the stars at night. Her teachers were not so encouraging. A high school physics teacher disparaged female scientists such as Marie Curie. Later, when that teacher learned that she had gotten a college scholarship, he told her, "As long as you stay away from science, you should do okay." This was an era when not many colleges accepted females to study astronomy. She applied to Vassar and Bryn Mawr. When she told the Bryn Mawr interviewer that she wanted to be an astronomer, she was encouraged to describe other interests. Vera mentioned that she liked to paint. The interviewer responded, "Why don't you consider a career in which you paint pictures of astronomical objects?" But Vera persevered and got a scholarship to Vassar, where she graduated with a degree in astronomy. She then earned a PhD from Georgetown with her children aged 2 and 4 at the commencement ceremony. She and husband Robert eventually had 4 children, all of whom have earned PhDs, as did Robert. Vera taught briefly at Georgetown after she got her PhD until she began her life's work at Carnegie beginning in 1965. Never having learned to drive, Vera walked the 5 blocks to Carnegie from her McKinley Street home. She died at the age of 88 in 2016 and was one of the few people then living who saw FDR in the flesh. As the story goes, one rainy day she was leaving school when FDR's motorcade pulled up to the curb where she was standing. He smiled at Vera as their eyes met. Vera recalled that FDR was returning from the Yalta conference on that day.
Thank you, Joan. Another oral history interviewee is still very much alive, although she's moved away from the area. but her work is with us every day. And Joan's going to tell us about muralist Regina Holiday.
Regina is a native of Oklahoma, and she was drawn to mural painting when she was an art student at Oklahoma State University. She painted her first mural in Chevy Chase on the outside wall of Child's Play. Then Jeffrey Gildenhorn asked her to paint iconic people from on the outside wall of his diner on Connecticut Avenue. After some research, she came up with the Rat Pack, Judy Garland, Elvis Presley, Joan Crawford, and Marilyn Monroe. But her most monumental and provocative mural is the one she calls 73 Cents, which is painted on the wall of the BP service station. It is viewed from the CVS parking lot. She designed it with her husband, Fred's input, as he lay dying of kidney cancer at the Washington Home Hospice in 2009. A week after Fred died, she began working on it, a 3-month project. The large mural is depicted as a theatrical stage, which memorizes the stage in which she and Fred met during a training class at OSU. A political painting about our healthcare system, it depicts the malign role of the medical, pharma, and insurance industries. Regina called it 73 cents because she was charged that amount per page to get Fred's medical records. In the mural, Regina is at the bedside of her dying husband. He is holding a note. "Go after them, Regina." The mural is rich in symbolism. A nurse is passing information to her from behind the doctor's back, a doctor that treated Fred badly. A medical professional is standing in waist, her hands tied behind her back. Regina's mother is shown in the white uniform of a housekeeper cleaning the floor. She displays a sign which says "slippery slope," a reference to the resistance of healthcare reform, this being the time when the Affordable Care Act was being debated. For people who may not understand her images, Regina is calling people to attention by messages posted on playbills, which again is a stage reference. There are symbolic references to works of art. Fred is posed as David's Death of Marat. Regina is shown as the lady in Picasso's Guernica. A nurse giving a blood transfusion is the light bringer from Guernica. The only natural light is an open window. On a tree, a Twitter bird represents the power of social media. Through Twitter, Regina was able to connect with a kidney cancer survivor and a Harvard physician. At the upper left-hand corner is a film reel, which represents Fred's life as it is unreeling. For economic reasons, Regina has moved away from Chevy Chase and is now living with her children in Grantsville, Maryland. She works as a manager of a nonprofit thrift shop, and her second gig is painting jackets with healthcare messages. She is starting a new phase of her life as she's studying to be a minister at the United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg.
Thank you, Joan, very much. The fourth topic we want to talk about in the time we have left is looking ahead. I confess I don't have particular insight on that, but we are well engaged in being a part of the community conversation as the city evolves. Tim Hannipel, who grew up on Rittenhouse Street, was himself part of a 1970s high school project that produced an amazing history resource, 2 collections of essays about early Chevy Chase DC, known as Origins 1 and Origins 2. Tim has stuck with that interest, and these decades later is leading our efforts to recognize and rename Lafayette Playground and Rec Center to become the Lafayette Pointer Rec Center and Playground. Tim, talk a little bit about where we're headed.
Thanks, Chaz, and hi, everybody. We're so glad that you're here on our virtual tour tonight. Let me just say first that Historic Chevy Chase DC really sees as a vital part of our mission to educate and inform the public about the history and culture of the neighborhood. And we do that through many means, including our dynamic website, which I really encourage you to check out if you have not. Kate and Chaz and others have done a fantastic job this year of revamping it with lots of new content. We also do public programming like what we're doing now with this virtual walking tour. And we're likewise committed to telling the full story of the origins of the residential segregation that marked Chevy Chase, DC, including the eviction of the free Black community on Broad Branch Road in 1928, and the descendants of Captain George Pointer, to make way for then all-white Lafayette Elementary School and the adjoining park. And we've done this really for a long time at Historic Chevy Chase, DC. One of our earlier presidents wrote a piece in Lafayette Life back in the late 1990s about the school. In his introduction, he wrote about the Black community of Broad Branch Road. Since then, in 2016, we have an oral history of a Pointer descendant, James Fisher, and genealogist Tanya Hardy, who joined the board of directors in 2020 of HCCDC. And then we began a grassroots, what I would call a grassroots education and organizing campaign to tell the story. In 2018, we advocated for historic signage to tell the story of the free Black community at Broad Branch Road and the Pointer descendants as part of the building of the new Lafayette Rec Center. And many of you, I'm so grateful and proud that you've been with us along the way, attending those meetings at the Rec Center, and then supporting us to get the even more recognition by adding the Pointer name to the Rec Center and to the park. And you'll recall, and you'll see some pictures over on the left-hand side of our petition drive. Many of you came out. We actually had 550 people sign petitions in just about 90 days. So we got lots of support from the community. We took the next step by seeking to rename the park as Lafayette Pointer Park. Legislation was introduced by Council Member Brandon Todd. He's there with our sign, Support Lafayette Pointer Park. There is the mayor and her daughter at the groundbreaking for the rec center, which you can see going up. It's almost nearing completion. And then most recently on the lower right-hand side was our hearing on September 15th, where we had fantastic testimony, including by two young Deal middle school students who attended that beautiful picture that in the middle there. That is James Fisher up at the front of a classroom of 200 Lafayette 4th and 5th graders, probably about the last time we ever convened before COVID back in February for a fantastic Black History Month presentation. Where we're going from here, I want to call your attention to, just keep your eye out on the rec center, because most recently we've been working on the signage, which is being paid for by the city, and it will soon be installed and unveiled at the rec center. And we really worked hard on it. We think you will all be proud of it as a testament to an acknowledgement of this really historic Black family. It can tell 247 years of history from the birth of Captain Pointer, enslaved on a Rockville plantation, to up until today, with his 8th generation descendant, James, explaining the history of his family and the really the acknowledgement of what happened on this ground. The other thing I want to point out, you'll continue to see this. We recently worked closely with a UDC professor, Amanda Huron, to win a large grant from Humanities DC. We're co-sponsoring the grant for her to add that as curriculum in the spring and to do additional oral history with college and high school students. So stay tuned for that. And I'm really, just to say again, so proud of the community for coming on this journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Chevy Chase is a lot more diverse now than it has been for most of the past century. But as we all know, the issues of density, access to affordable housing, jobs, and schools are very much part of the agenda that the city faces. And Chevy Chase is a part of that city. But we live in a comfortable bubble up here that can make it too easy to let those be other people's problems. So we can value your views on how we can best accelerate both needed recognition of the past, but also be part of the solution to today's challenges. So to do this, we're going to continue to host events on a range of issues related to the history, the streetscape, and the people of Chevy Chase, DC. And while your attendance at events such as this is one piece of the feedback for us, we welcome the more direct kind as well. We don't have any monopoly on talking about these issues, and we look forward to our continued partnership with CCCA, with the Friends of Lafayette Park, the Northwest Neighborhood Village, and many other civic groups. So in all of this, our goal is to provide the community with research, with space for discussion, and to provide an opportunity for many voices to be heard. If you think we're on the right track, we'd love to have you let us know that. But also, if you think we should be doing something else as well, let us know. You should expect that we may ask for your help in doing that, of course. Everyone's got different abilities and different amounts of free time, and we welcome all sorts of volunteer effort. If you can't do that, of course, we value your membership. Several of you here have made voluntary contributions for tonight's event, and we especially thank you. The software to do these events is expensive for us. We've only had a few questions. One of them about the George Pointer, the displacement of citizens, is answered in depth on our website and also in an upcoming book to be published by the Georgetown University Press. The question that Carolyn Halal asked was what were the advantages and disadvantages of living in either Chevy Chase D or Chevy Chase, Maryland. I don't know the answer to that myself. I'll invite any of my fellow panelists if you want to venture a serious or a non-serious answer to that question.
Chaz, one thought is that Maryland, back in the days of Newlands, the first houses were built in Maryland, and no commercial development or even institutional development, I guess, was allowed there. And the school and the commercial stretch was relegated to the DC side of the line. So maybe that says something.
In the modern era, I guess I'm not sure. People have their preferences for leafier streets or more dense housing, I suppose, or being able to walk to the movies and the drugstore and the Safeway. And other people would prefer to drive and be able to walk to the country club.
Chaz, I'd add the constant difference has been enfranchisement for Maryland folks having the vote in Congress and the district residents not. So that's one bit of business that still needs to be rectified.
Yeah, I would actually add to that just a bit by offering the observation that's making the rounds in the listserv, among other things, Chevy Chase listserv, that DC has developed a special identity. There are a few people who offer the idea of retroceding DC into Maryland in order to attain the ability, the voting rights, and et cetera, and representation that Keene refers to. But there are many of us who resist that because over the course of the last 200 years, we have developed our own identity, and it's been a tortured one in many respects. But it's our community and it's our struggle, and it uniquely defines us as a municipality.
The last colony, right, Carl?
Hey, Keene, how about a word on comparative taxation, property and personal income?
I haven't checked this in the last, couple, 5 years maybe, but the last time that I saw an analysis of that, there's surprisingly little difference between the total tax load on either side of the line. DC and Maryland, if you add up property tax, sales tax, income tax, everything together, there's not a substantive difference between the cost of living in the two jurisdictions. The exception would be if your income is super high, I mean, like 7 figures plus, it's probably a little cheaper in Maryland. But generally speaking, for most folks, there's no real tax load difference. Our brethren in Virginia have a lower tax load, but then you've got to live in Virginia.
On that note, any of you who are in the 10-figure income bracket would like to become lifetime members of Historic Chevy Chase DC, regardless of where you live, you're very welcome to join. I want to thank everybody for your attention throughout the course of this evening's history tour. With any luck, we'll be able to go back to live events by next fall. And you'll get full Keen Taylor for the whole tour, but you'll be able to get some exercise as well. I want to thank my fellow members of the Historic Chevy Chase DC board for your work to put this together and to rehearse it and to present it tonight. But again, thank you all to the audience, and please visit our website to find out more. Thank you and good night.
Stay safe, everybody.